Hello viewers, welcome back to our series of lectures on NMR spectroscopy. Today we will continue our discussion and talk about the measurement of chemical shift and the factors affecting chemical shift. The session is planned as follows, that is, to begin with we will briefly review what we did in the previous session. Thereafter we will talk about how do we measure chemical shift or how do we quantify it, and then in the process we will talk about what kind of reference compounds we need to use, why of them, and then what are they. Then thereafter we will talk about the two scales which are used for referring to chemical shifts or indicating the chemical shifts. They happen to be delta and the tau scales. Then we will talk about the factors affecting chemical shift. We will list the factors there and start talking about each one of them. Then towards the end we will try to sum up what we do in today's session. Okay. Now let's review what we did in the previous session. In the previous session we basically explained different types of recordings of NMR spectra. There are different ways of recording NMR spectra. We talked about the continuous wave NMR spectra and also the FT-NMR. Thereafter we outlined the advantages of FT-NMR over CW-NMR, that is continuous wave NMR spectroscopy. Then we stated the characteristics of NMR spectrum, that means what are different characteristics which go with the NMR spectrum, and then we explained one of the characteristics that happens to be chemical shift, and from there only we are trying to build up what we are going to do in today's session. Let us recall what we said about chemical shift. You will remember that chemical shift basically refers to the variation in absorption frequencies for different nuclei in the molecule, and these arise because of the shielding and de-shielding effects. Basically we have a nucleus, it absorbs a certain frequency, and depending on the electronic environment around the nucleus, the frequencies at which it absorbs changes, and there are certain parameters, certain effects which cause either the shielding or the de-shielding of the nuclei from the applied magnetic field. I mean, field is applied like this from that in the z direction, and we have a nucleus here. So different neighboring nuclei or different atoms and all, how do they affect this? So that actually is we are going to take up today as well. Now typically we remember that we showed you the spectrum of ethanol here. So we find that in case of ethanol there are three different types of protons there. This is methyl group there which is coming somewhere here, methylene comes somewhere here, and OH comes at a different position there. That means all the three types of protons are different, they come at different frequencies. We will now try to quantify. We just said somewhere there, we will try to give meaning to where and what does it mean. Now let us see that how do we talk about, how do we make measurement, because there are different signals are coming there. So what is the position of the signal there? How do I label that? How do I tag that? Let us see. Now in order to do that, typically all the spectroscopy we done earlier, we find that it is very simple, that the x-axis happens to be some measure of energy. It could be frequency, wavelength, wave number, but in case of NMR we can't do that, because there are certain issues in this. The issues happen to be, firstly, the shift in resonance frequency is with respect to that of a bare proton, because when we talked about the principle, the philosophy or the phenomenon of NMR, we said we started with a bare proton, and then we said that from when we go from bare proton to a hydrogen atom or to other systems there, we find that shift in the signal there, but we cannot have a bare proton for comparison. So I cannot have a comparison there, so how do I quantify it? How do I tell what is the chemical shift there? Second issue is that this magnitude of chemical shift is very small. That is, if I use a magnetic field of say about 2.3487 Tesla, which we used in the previous session as an example there, which corresponds to about 100 megahertz of frequency, we find that the maximum shift we can expect of it, what we observe, is of the order of about 25 micro Tesla. Mind you, this is about 2.34 Tesla, this is 25 micro Tesla, which is a very, very small number. Essentially we are dealing with very large frequencies and the shift happens to be very, very tiny there. So it becomes difficult to make accurate measurements of all the frequencies and talk about a shift in them. Then thirdly, the chemical shift actually depends on the strength of the magnetic field, and that is very, very tricky, because if I use a low strength of the field, I get certain value there. If I use higher strength of the field, I get a different value. So, I cannot have a unique number for a given signal there. How do I do that? How do we resolve that? Because all these issues need to be resolved. How do we go about? The way out here is, that is, we use some kind of a suitable reference compound. Let us see what is the reference compound there. Typically, most often than not, we use TMS, that is tetramethylsilane, as a reference compound. That is the most commonly used reference compound there. That is the structure of this one. That means there are 4 methyl groups attached to a silicon atom there. We will talk about it why of so. Then another example could be, that is 2,2-dimethyl 2-silapentane 5-sulfonate, that is abbreviated as DSS. This is actually used for aqueous solvents. TMS is used for all non-aqueous solvents, be it CDCl3 or DMSO and things like that. So, everywhere we use TMS, and DSS we use when you talk about the aqueous solvents there. Now, why TMS? Let us see why did we choose TMS, because we mentioned we need a suitable reference compound. So, what qualifies TMS to be a suitable molecule for the purpose? Let us see. Firstly, and very importantly, that there are 12 protons, and all of them happen to be chemically and magnetically equivalent. That means all of them are going to absorb at the same frequency. That implies that intense signal will be observed even at very low concentration. That means if I add TMS in very small amount, even then also I can get a reasonably good signal, because when you talked about, when you showed a spectrum to you, we see that different signals have got different intensities. Intensity actually is in a way representative of the number of protons causing that, though actually it is not intensity per se, it is the area under the peak, but the intensity also contributes to that. Now, the second important characteristic of TMS is that the boiling point is 27 degrees centigrade, which is low, and of course, it is soluble in most of the solvents there. So, as a consequence of this, what we can do is, that means you take, say I want to run spectrum for a given molecule. I take the compound, dissolve into a suitable solvent, say CDCl3, put into that, and then put a small amount of TMS to that. Then thereafter, I run the spectrum, having recorded that, I can just warm it a little. This being a very low boiling solvent, low boiling molecule, it will go off. That means I can separate it very easily. That means I do not contaminate my material there. And secondly, of course, it is soluble in most of the solvents there. So, no matter what solvent we are using for recording NMR spectrum, I can use TMS as a reference compound there. That is the second quality of this. The third one is that silicon atom happens in the TMS is less electronegative than the carbon. So, what you see is, this is silicon, these are carbon over there, and carbon electronegativity is about 2.55, that of silicon is about 1.9. That means silicon is electropositive. As a consequence, what happens is that the electron density around these nuclei, these protons, is large. That means they will come to resonance at very high frequency there. That means it will absorb at a frequency which is different from all the normal molecules which you come across. So, it is going to be away from all of them. So, there is no interference there. Now, because of the difference in electronegativity, what happens is, that is, the methyl groups of TMS are relatively electron rich, and because of their being electron rich, we find that the protons which are attached to of this carbon atom there, attached to this carbon atom here, they absorb at high field, higher than most of the hydrogen atoms we come across in different molecules. Thereby, most of the NMR signals what we observe in different molecules or different compounds, they appear to be downfield to the left of the TMS signal. We will explain that as we proceed further. Now, yet another characteristic there, that is, the TMS is highly inert. That is a very good quality of TMS, because being inert, it does not interact with most of the compounds we deal with. As a consequence, it does not interfere in the NMR spectrum. That means, if there is some kind of interaction between the TMS and the compound which you are studying, if the interaction is there, then the spectra might get altered there. Since they do not interact, so we can get a reasonably good spectrum which is representative of the molecule which we are dealing with, and not a consequence of some kind of interaction from outside molecule there. So, what do we do is, So, we take a small amount of TMS, add it to the sample, and what we do? We make the measurement of difference in magnetic fields at which the sample protons and the reference, that is TMS, absorbs, that we measure there. So, what we get is something of this kind, that is this signal where our TMS is coming or the reference is there, this is assigned a value of 0, because this is like when you talk about the temperature scale, the freezing point of water is given a value of 0, it is an arbitrary value. Same thing here, we are giving whatever the frequency, because it is not 0 here, TMS also will absorb at certain frequency or certain field, so that actually is given as 0. So, all measurements will start from here onwards. That means, whatever measurements we do for different signals there, that will be with respect to TMS being 0. So, that is a meaning of defining a reference compound here. So, what I am showing you here is, it is a PMR, that is a proton NMR spectrum of methanol at 100 megahertz or 2.349 Tesla. What you find is, there are two signals in this case, we will get into signals at a later stage. But what is important is that these two signals are coming at a frequency of about 340 hertz here, and this is at 480 hertz with respect to our TMS there. So, that is fine, some number is coming there. So, I am talking about frequencies with respect to the reference compound. Now, take the same molecule and make measurement at a higher field, say a spectrometer working at 500 megahertz in frequency or at a field of about 11.745 Tesla. When I do that, I find that this signal which was coming at a low frequency now, it's shifted about 1700 hertz from the reference, and this is coming at 2400 hertz there. So, this is very, very tricky. It is intriguing this, that we are getting two different values for a given signal. I have a same molecule of methanol, but on measuring on different instruments, I am finding that there are different values to that, which we cannot afford. We have to have a unique identification for a given signal for a given molecule. How do we go about it? How do we go about it is, that is, we try to make some kind of a scale which is field independent. How do we do that? Let us understand. Suppose I have a magnetic field as B naught, the resonance condition which we have been talking about many times is that they happen to be, if I just take the test sample is the compound I am measuring, a reference is my TMS here. So, for the test sample, H nu test will be equal to G n mu n B naught 1 minus sigma test, this is just to tell that screening constant for the molecule I am dealing with. Similarly, this is for my reference there. This equation we have talked about many times. Okay. Now, if this be so, but I am now trying to look at the relative, that means the frequency with respect to that. So, if I want to talk about that, I have to talk about what is the shift in the resonance frequency, because chemical shift is shift because of the chemical nature, and that shift now we are measuring with respect to the reference compounds, that is my TMS here. If I do that, I find that H nu test minus H nu reference, I can just substitute the things here and simplify it. What do I get is something of this kind, that is H nu test minus nu reference to be equal to G n mu n B naught 1 minus so and so forth. I just simplify it further and set sigma reference to be equal to 0, which is kind of thing which we are defining right here. When I do that, I find that I get an expression of this kind, that is shift in frequency happens to be given by the following expression there. Do not bother about the expressions there, the concept part of it is important here. If I go further, we find that this is my frequency for a given field. If I take the field to be say about twice that field, the frequency will become just twice of the same thing. That means, this just to indicate that the frequencies of a given signal with respect to my reference compound depends on the field, which we cannot afford to continue with. So, we need to make it field independent, and that field independence can be achieved by dividing this shift in frequency by the operating frequency. What it means is the following. That means, I define some parameter here which we will try to identify now, that we say is equal to, this is my shift in frequency and this is new operational frequency. That means, the frequency at which the instrument is operating, say 100 megahertz, 500 megahertz or whatever. When I do that, I get what is called as a dimensionless quantity, because this is in hertz, so is this one. So, this becomes a dimensionless quantity, which is what we are trying to look forward to. When I do that, what you find is that this parameter what we get, this actually is very, very small. The reason being that this numerator here, that is new test minus new reference, happens to be in hertz. We have just seen that 400 hertz, 700 hertz or 2000 hertz, it is in hertz, whereas operating frequency is in megahertz, 100 megahertz, 500 megahertz and so on and so forth. So, this is going to be a very, very tiny fraction, which again will be very inconvenient to use. So, to get over this, what we do, we define a unit for chemical shift as delta. Delta, it is in ppm, and that is defined as follows, that is your new test minus new reference by new operational frequency into 10 to the power 6. This factor is put here just to make this number reasonable. It is like 1, 2, 3 and so on and so forth. So, the numbers which we can handle or deal with easily there. This is what is called as the delta scale there. So, delta is defined as follows. This is my shift in frequency for a given signal, this is the operational frequency of the instrument, and 10 to the power 6 is the multiplying factor over there. Okay. Now, let us take an example. Now, suppose if the proton signal in NMR spectrum of a benzene molecule, if I take, it is observed at a frequency about 2181 hertz with respect to TMS in an NMR spectrometer operating at 300 megahertz. So, if that be so, the question is, what is the chemical shift of the proton in benzene? It is very simple to evaluate. We know that what we are given here is, that is the shift in frequency is 2181 hertz and operating frequency is 300 into 10 to the power 6 hertz, that is megahertz there. I just substitute into the expression for my delta which we defined just now. When I substitute there, what I get is delta ppm to be equal to 7.27. So, this is just a number, no unit to this. So, we say that the benzene protons absorb at delta equal to 7.27. So, that is the way we talk about chemical shift. We will be talking about anytime and every time we talk about NMR spectrum. So, this is so commonly used there. Okay. Let us move a little further and see what is this delta scale. This delta scale basically is a scale which ranges from 0 to 10 ppm, because that is where most of the protons which come across in different organic molecules, they absorb there. We look at this scale here, that is how do we represent. So, we find that our TMS absorbs at the highest field, because this is increasing field here, this arrow indicates the field increase there. So, TMS absorbed at the maximum field, and this has been given a value of 0 here, 0 as a frequency, and also on the delta scale also it is 0 there. So, and then this is my other kind of different scale, different values of delta which are possible there, 1, 2, 3 up to 10 and so. Some of the protons, say in case of acids and all, they do go beyond 10 also. You can get a signal at even 12 and so on and so forth. In some extreme cases, rare cases though, we can have some protons which are absorbing at a frequency at a value, delta value to be negative there, because they come even upfield of our TMS, but they are rare things. Most of the molecules we deal with, they will fall in somewhere from 0 to 10 ppm. That is typically how do we talk about delta scale. Okay. Now, a higher value of delta, that means you are somewhere here, say 7 is a higher value as compared to 3, we know that. So, that means if a value of delta is high for a given signal, we say it is downfield there, because this is low field here, this is low field, this is increasing, this is high field here. So, a value of delta which is larger value is actually indicating of a downfield proton there, and a high field signal there somewhere here, it will have a low value of delta. This actually is very intriguing, because some people found it very, very odd there. That means there is some kind of a reciprocity there, reciprocal relationship there. Delta value increases, the field decreases actually. So, just to get over that, another scale was defined, what is called as tau scale. And tau scale basically is kind of a linear shift there. We just defined tau to be equal to 10 minus delta. When we do that, then if it is like this, so when delta is equal to 0, tau becomes 10. So, we have it here, and it just goes in the reverse direction there. So, the 10, 9 and so on and so forth. So, in this case what you find is that a lower value of the tau scale will be equivalent to a low field there. So, there is a correspondence over there, but though tau scale is more appropriate as it stands, but it is not used that often. We are still continue to use with delta scale because that's become customary to use there, and we are quite acquainted with using delta scale. So, most of times we use delta scale, though tau scale has also been defined for the purpose. Okay. Let us move further and just try to reaffirm the meaning of because these terms will be using very often, upfield, downfield. So, they basically are relative terms there. So, that is my delta scale here. So, this is my TMS and this is high field side, this is my low field side there. So, anything which shifts towards this side, we say it is going upfield, that means going to a lower delta value or higher field value, and this is going downfield. So, these upfield, downfield basically are relative terms. So, signal at 7 is downfield from 4, but it is at upfield from a signal at 10. So, it is all relative there, but these terms will be used very often there. Okay. Let us go further and talk about what are the factors that affect chemical shift, because this is a very elaborate thing we have to understand. I did make a mention of it earlier also, because we need to understand the basics of what are these characteristics and what are the factors that affect them. Once we know that, then if I have a spectrum, I can make sense out of it. I try to get information out of it and try to get the kind of information about the structure of the molecule I am dealing with. Okay. So, what are the factors there? Just one thing which we need to recall here is, that is the chemical shift, we know that they arise because of shielding and deshielding effects of the electrons around the nucleus I am trying to look at. So, any factor which affects the electronic environment around the active nuclei would alter its chemical shift. That is the way we can try to rationalize the factors which are affecting the chemical shift there. And the common factors which come into play, they happen to be the electronegativity, which works by electronegativity of atoms other than the nucleus I am trying to deal with. Then bond anisotropy, this is a very important factor which we will be taking up at a later stage, and hydrogen bonding as well. So, there are three common factors which affect the magnitude of chemical shift of a given proton in the sample there. Let us talk about the first factor first, electronegativity. Now, if you have a molecule, an atom of high electronegativity in a molecule that draws the bonded electron towards itself. This is just a picture here, because you see that this is carbon, these three are hydrogens here. So, this is a chlorine atom there. So, chlorine has a very high electronegativity as compared to that of carbon. As a consequence of this, so the electrons around this carbon will be pulled by chlorine atom here, and this carbon becomes electron deficient a little bit. It will pull electrons from the protons there. So, as a consequence, these protons becomes deshielded. So, that is how electronegativity will come into picture. That means, it will change the environment around the protons there. So, as a consequence, we see that the electron density decreases around the proton, and this nucleus gets deshielded. So, because electrons were trying to shield from the applied field. Now, since electrons have been pulled away, so the nucleus gets deshielded. As a consequence, the delta values goes to downfield. That means, the delta value becomes large when that corresponds to low field there. We will need lower field for that resonance to come into picture. Now, we are trying to show you a picture of this kind. Let us understand what are these pictures, what do they indicate. These basically are called as electrostatic potential maps. Let us have a brief look at it. Basically, what I am trying to show here is, this is EPM or electrostatic potential map for a methane molecule there. In case of methane, what you know is that the electronegativity of carbon, which is about 2.5, is more than that of hydrogen, which is about 2.1. So, as a consequence, there will be partial charge separation there. Carbon will be slightly negatively charged as compared to the proton there. And these electrostatic potential maps, they are done with the help of certain softwares there. What they do is, they indicate the electron densities in molecules there, and they are indicated in terms of colors there. A red color is indicative of high electron density and blue is indicative of low. So, that is a kind of we have a scale of this kind, and yellow, green come in between. So, you find is, in case of methane here, this carbon atom, you have got red cloud over there. That means, there is more electron density here, and these hydrogens having partial positive charges over there, that is why they are showing as blue there. Now, when I move from this, say I come to a molecule of this kind, say this is chloromethane. In case of chloromethane, what you find is, because of this chlorine atom here and this electronegativity being much larger than that of carbon, so electrons are pulled towards this, we find that this is indicated by red coloration here, whereas around this we find that the coloration is blue. There is some kind of a charge separation, carbon is now delta positive there. On the other hand, if I take say lithium, in this case here we find that lithium has got electronegativity lesser, it is about 1, and carbon happens to be, lithium is about 0.8 to 1 or somewhere, and carbon happens to be 2.5. So, we find that the charge separation is of opposite nature there. This is highly positive, this is highly negative there. So, that is how we typically look at electrostatic potential maps there, because they become very handy in talking about effect of electronegativity. Now, what you find is that effect of electronegativity on chemical shift position of some alkyl halides. Let us look at some data here. What you see is that if I take halogen atom, I am basically looking at CH3X alkyl halide, say methyl halides there. Now, this is my CH3F, CH3Cl and so on and so forth. Find that as we move like this, we find that electronegativity is decreasing here, and so is the delta value. There is a 1-to-1 correspondence there, because fluorine is highly electronegative. So, when the fluorine atom is there, it will pull electrons away from the carbon atom, which in turn will pull electrons away from the hydrogen atom. The proton will go highly downfield, the delta value will increase. Chlorine will do to a lesser extent, bromine will do to still lesser extent, and so on and so forth. So, we find that there is 1-to-1 correspondence between the electronegativity of the group attached to carbon atom and the delta value of the proton being measured over there. So, we find that the protons get de-shielded because of the increasing electronegativity of the group attached to carbon atom there. Now, sometimes if I take, there are number of electronegative atoms is increasing, what happens to the charge separation there? Look at this. This is my CH4 methane molecule there, we have seen that earlier. Now, if I take CH3Cl, this is chloromethane, we find that there is a charge separation there, this is negative, this is positive there. But if there are 2 chlorine atoms or 3 of them, we find that charge separation increases there. As a consequence, if I look at the delta values of these protons, we find that for CH4 it is coming at 0.23, that is the base value here. For CH3Cl it is 3.10, that means just in the introduction of 1 chlorine atom here, this has shifted about by almost 2.8 ppm. Now, with 2 chlorine atoms it becomes still larger, but with 3 it becomes much larger there. What you find is that as we go on adding more and more groups which are electronegative, we find that this effect is cumulative. They add on, they do not add literally, but the effect is some kind of combination of all of them there. Okay. So, we find that there are, if there are more atoms of this kind, the effect will be more there. Okay. Now, one more thing which we have to bear in mind is, because all these electronegativity effects are coming because of the inductive effect of electronegative atom there. So, this actually fades out with the as a matter of distance there. Let us see this. Look at this molecule of 1-chloropropane. So, what you see is, this is my chlorine atom there. So, these 2 methylenes here, the methylene protons here, they come to resonance at about 3.3 ppm, which is fairly low as compared to methane, which is 0.23. But this is my alpha protons here. If you look at the beta methylene now, it is 1.6. You come to gamma carbon here, we find that it is 0.9. That means, this pulling effect of our halogen atom goes on fading out, it decreases as we go away from the electronegative atom there. This is a common occurrence there. So, having talked about the effect of electronegativity on the chemical shift, let us sum up for today. Let us sum up what we have done today is, we have just started by briefly reviewing the contents of the previous session. Thereafter, we established the need of a reference compound to measure chemical shift, because we raised certain issues there, because we cannot have a bare proton and so on and so forth. So, we established that we need some kind of reference compound, and that reference compound we said happens to be TMS. We listed different reference compounds there, and primarily we talked about 2 of them, and thereafter we justified TMS to be a choice, because we talked about the qualities of TMS which make it a suitable choice as a reference compound here. Then we explained two scales which are used for talking about chemical shifts. They happen to be delta and tau scales there, and then we took up the effect of electronegativity of attached groups on the proton chemical shift. And the other factors which affect the chemical shift like the anisotropic effect and hydrogen bonding etc., that will be taken up in the next session there. Thank you.